So, welcome to our plenary, there when needed, the promise of general insurance. I'm afraid it's not part of my skill set to lead you in a crowd calisthenics session, but it will be a fantastic session and a great ending to our conference. I think everybody will be super enthused and engaged by what our expert panelists have to offer. So the question we're asking in this session is the process, payout and the human experience of making a claim lining up with the promise made to consumers? So in this session, we're going to hear from the Chief General Manager Consumer at Allianz, Shez Ford, and from a Non-Executive Director at ART, Helen Rowell, and we will ask them whether it's time to rewrite the promise, and if so, what would the new promise look like going forward? And I have to say, this is an area I'm very passionate about as someone who worked in general insurance for a long time. And I'm also very excited to have such distinguished leaders as Shez and Helen here with us to lead this discussion. So Shez is the Chief General Manager Consumer at Allianz Australia, which, as you know, is one of Australia's largest general insurers and is the Australian arm of the world's largest general insurer. She joined Allianz last year from the Commonwealth Bank, where she was the Executive General Manager for the Wealth and Private Business and for Advice and Insurance. And prior to the Commonwealth Bank, Shez was the Head of Insurance Operations at ANZ Wealth, and in total has had 30 years of leadership experience within insurance and financial services. Helen is a Non-Executive Director. She was recently appointed as Chair of the independent panel reviewing the General Insurance Code of Practice. Until mid-last year, Helen was the Deputy Chair of APRA, having spent the previous 21 years lifting standards of practice and leading major reforms across the superannuation and insurance industries. She has represented APRA and indeed Australia in numerous high-level international financial services regulatory bodies. And prior to being at APRA, Helen was a partner at Towers Perrin, and she is, of course, a past president of the Actuaries Institute. So we welcome Shez and Helen, and I'll hand over to them now.
The main floods occurred really with Rochester. I mean, they were the main impact. About 90% of Rochester was completely wiped out. Nowhere to live, just their house had been destroyed. They were just devastated, absolutely devastated, yeah.
The worst flood that we recorded so far, and it ended up impacting our house. So the damage to the house from the flood was quite extensive, lost pretty much all of our furniture.
Rochester has certainly been the epicentre of this flood event. Pretty significant flooding through the area, in some circumstances a metre of water through homes. Our immediate strategy was to get down into the district, so we mobilised, we moved people from Sydney, we brought people across from South Australia and down from Queensland as well. We set up in a recovery centre based over at the Lawn Tennis Centre over there. Rochester has a really fantastic community vibe, and it was very apparent very early on that there wasn't going to be accommodation for the amount of displaced families. There was a real risk of the community fragmenting with people being outside of the district.
We have a lot of friends and family involved in the community. We have a lot of friends that own businesses in the community. So we really wanted to stay in town to support the town.
So I had the idea that a caravan solution might be a way forward for a lot of the customers in this district. Putting a van on their premises allows them to look after their animals, keeps their children in the local schools, and allows income to be given to the local district and the local businesses here. So I was driving on the Midland Highway coming through Bendigo and looked out the window on the left-hand side. Sure enough, one of the great caravan dealerships, Prestige Jayco, and I sort of pulled in and went and introduced myself to the team in there.
Yeah, so the daytime... Didn't even think of caravans, emergency housing. And we sort of clicked and thought, yeah, well, why not?
What size is this?
It's 22 foot.
Wow.
It's a really good couples van. You can see the Starcraft. So this one would be available now. We can get this down to Rochester straight away. Yeah, so you can see the large bed.
So bathroom facilities down the back, separate toilet, separate shower. Yeah, I think this will make all the difference for this family.
Sometimes you think something's too good to be true. Scott assured us that we were fine, that our policy covered that, and they were happy to do it and get it done nice and quickly.
Well, Scott would say, okay, I've got X amount person, X amount of money to spend.
So Trent made a commitment to start looking for additional vans.
We were out looking for vans from all over Victoria.
He started travelling across Victoria to bring other vans back into the dealership.
So having a van and being able to stay at home is something that we just thought it was the best thing we could do, to stay in town to support the town.
Well, for the right customer, it enables them to remain connected to their community. It keeps their children in schools.
Able still to have those gatherings with friends and family.
I think the other thing that really gives a lot of people comfort is that they're part of the redevelopment of their property. They see the work that's taking place, so they're part of the journey of repair as well. It connects builders to our customers as well, so there's a regular contact with that. It just keeps the process moving along.
The main benefit for the customer is that actually they've kept an asset.
The customer owns the van, we buy it in the customer's name, it's an asset for them.
You're paying for accommodation somewhere and then you lose that money. We're here, you've bought an asset.
I think we will keep it and actually use it what it's meant for and go for a holiday.
For this event, we've had give or take 3,000 claims, and I think for small communities like that, it's a pretty significant impact.
We probably towed half a dozen up there. Did quite a number, 15 or 16 families that we actually helped.
Yeah, look, I'm really proud of the way in which we worked with Prestige Jayco. I think that it's a business that backed our vision for what we could do here, and they've been as much a part of this solution as what we have.
It's funny, you know, I've changed my own insurance to Allianz because of this experience.
They are the stories that remind us of the key role that we play as an industry. We exist to pay claims. We were there when we are needed, when the unexpected happens, big and small. We're there when the natural disasters strike, when a family loses their home because of flood, like what we just saw, and from bushfires like we saw in the Black Summer in 2020. We're there to help them rebuild their lives from the ground up, offering financial support when they need it the most. We're there when our customers and communities are there at their most vulnerable. And we're there for the little events, when there's a ding in the car and the car needs to get fixed quickly so people can get on with their lives. I am proud of this industry. We paid nearly 40 billion in claims in the last year alone, and we've had just a plethora of catastrophe events in 2023. But the last few years have been particularly challenging for our community, and the trust in our industry has taken a significant hit. It's an industry that received over 240,000 claims for the February-March 2022 New South Wales and South East Queensland floods, which was Australia's largest and I think the second largest catastrophe in the world. We were unprepared for the size and scale, and our customers in the community faced delays and unsatisfactory service experiences due to skills shortages and supply chain issues. We also learned at that time that product design features, which were well intended, just did not perform the way we expected them to. But indeed, there was a lot we learned from the 2022 floods. We all know that the rubber hits the road at claim time. It's important that we're ready to respond to national disasters and have empowered staff, people like Scott, that can assess and do what's necessary. The last few years, as I said, have tested us in so many aspects of our operations. Our claims case management capabilities, our communication capabilities, our project management of external providers, the robustness of our complaints capabilities, and of course, product design and its capacity to respond to the various scenarios we faced. Whilst we as an industry continue to build scalable and resilient insurance operations, there is also a lot more that needs to be done. But it is the collective work of the industry, the community, and the government, local, state, federal, that will ultimately make the difference in building a resilient Australia. So what should we do? First, building scalable operations is a key priority, and we've been working hard at it. Investment in technology to reimagine the entire insurance experience, automated claims management, straight-through processing, using AI, machine learning, satellite imagery, so that we can or minimise and take away the burden of proof from our customers in the moments that really matter. We are already starting to see fully automated claims processes with acceptances down to a few minutes in certain cases. Claim submissions via mobile apps with zero paperwork, and only additional evidence is required where it must be had. The use of satellite imagery post-event also allows us as insurers to check in on impacted customers and initiate claims processes without waiting for paperwork. Satellite imagery, we know, is also available in agricultural insurance to monitor rainfall, drought, crop, and therefore trigger payouts. And we learned we have to really prepare well for disasters. These events are no longer 1 in 100-year events. These are happening more frequently, and we have to be prepared. And I know as insurers, we're all united in the need for all of us to be well prepared. Building scalable operations that are highly tech-enabled is critical. This means investing to ensure that our processes are streamlined, simplified, high degrees of automation, and customer communication at the very heart of it. Access to sensors, as I said, AI, satellite imagery, all the modern capabilities we need to bring in. But we also need to think about how we build capacity in our people, how we actually have the capacity to flex our workforce at these moments. We also need to focus not just on solving for claims and handling claims, but also how do we prevent claims. As an industry, as you saw, we're absolutely there when the unexpected happens. But we also have the important role to help our customers manage their risks. Working with our customers to help them protect themselves is a key priority. No one wants a leaky roof, no one wants their house flooded or to be gutted through fire. So we're digging hard to understand and work with our community to understand what we can do to play our part. And technology, once again, is a key part, a key enabler for this. Already we use mobile phone data to provide insurers drivers feedback on how well they're driving. We can pick up on speeding and late braking and mobile use. Available to us, as you know very well, is predictive analytics, and there is so much of it. The capacity to identify customers who have significant exposures to disasters allows us as insurers to be more protective. But we could also better understand behavioural aspects that we could work with our community and customers to help incentivise to change behaviours. We have created personalised education programs tailored to individual customer needs, and using deep analytics, assess hazard risks and provide incentives to consumers with new and better maintained properties and for taking preventative actions such as use of in-home sensors and monitors. Another way to prepare for disaster is really to stress test our product design. As I said, what we've learned through the catastrophes that we've had recently is our products haven't behaved the right way all the time. Standard definitions of natural hazards in insurance will help remove some of the confusion consumers feel when it comes to insurance. This would mean that all insurers have the same definition as we did with flood today. There's a Treasury consultation paper which is considering standardising definitions of fire, storm, and stormwater and rainwater runoff. But again, whilst I think this goes some way to help remove confusion and complexity, we need to build these into our products and propositions and experiences and stress test them to make sure that they work the right way in moments of crisis. Whilst we have a lot to do as insurers, we cannot secure Australia's future alone. We need support and leadership from all our levels of government. In addressing affordability pressures, we need government support and assistance. Yes, the cyclone pool goes some way. It's designed to lower insurance premiums for households and small businesses with high cyclone and flood-related risks, but there is more that can be done. We have already called for better tax and financial incentives. We have called for the abolition of state taxes such as stamp duty and other levies that are unfair and distortionary. At Allianz, we're advocating for a government-backed flood reinsurance pool to improve the affordability of insurance for high flood risk households. There is an opportunity for government to relieve the upward pressure on claims costs from labour shortages through access to work visas for overseas skills in building and vehicle repair trades. There is a significant role that local, state and federal government need to play in prevention of losses caused by natural disasters. The Disaster Ready Fund, established by the federal government, is a good start but needs expansion. The establishment of hazard insurance partnership, enabling us to work with government agencies to implement practical initiatives to build resilience in high-risk areas, is another great initiative. And recently, the federal government announced investment to deliver Australia's first national climate risk assessment and national adaptation plan. They will provide analysis to guide decisions on how Australia should adapt to its significant climate risks through a shared national framework. Conversations around building dams and levees to mitigate flood risk, avoiding housing development in high-risk flood areas are all the right conversations, but they must come with swift action from all parts of the community. I believe this industry is enormously purpose-led with deep care and commitment to the community. I feel incredibly proud and honoured to be able to work in this industry. But I also acknowledge that the last few years have been challenging for us, and we have not always been at our best. In fact, you could say that we experienced one of the most challenging storms in many ways, increasing levels of devastating natural disasters in the midst of high inflation and significant geopolitical issues impacting causing supply chain issues. We found ourselves unprepared. We must, and I know we are digging deep to respond to these experiences, to better use technology, reimagine the insurance experiences so we can play the part that we can, need and want to help Australia help protect Australians. Ultimately, though, we need to all collaborate to get there. We have learnt a lot, and why waste a crisis like that? We need to innovate, we need to come together, and we need to protect Australia. Thank you.
Thank you, Shez, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here and speaking to you, and may I thank you all for sticking it out to the very end. I know I'm standing here between you and an airport bus. Look, general insurance is important, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you just how important it is, because it provides protection to the Australian community, the financial sector and the economy. It has a number of roles to play, giving confidence and protection before claims occur and helping with resilience and recovery afterwards. But of course, in the wake of some of those challenging events and that ever-increasing scale and frequency of major catastrophe events that Shez talked about, increasing complaints about general insurance being made to AFCA, some significant shortcomings being identified in reviews undertaken by both APRA and ASIC in recent years, it is a sector facing significant challenges. And so there are genuine questions being asked by several stakeholders as to whether general insurance is adequately fulfilling its promise to consumers. And it does seem clear that changes are needed to ensure it is going to be better able to meet that promise in the future. In my previous role as APRA Deputy Chair with oversight responsibility for insurance, I did make a point of highlighting the significant contribution of the general insurance industry in meeting their claims obligations and supporting their customers in times of need. But I also outlined the areas where there was room for insurers to lift their game, and in particular that was around contributing to solutions to affordability and availability, strengthening their risk management practices across the whole product life cycle, and investing more in innovation to ensure that insurance products and insurers' operating and business models are fit for the future. Now, today I'm speaking to you in a different capacity, but I'm actually going to touch, and my comments will touch on those same three areas, because those three areas are where it remains critical to address to ensuring that the general insurance does deliver better outcomes for Australians, for more Australians in future. Let me talk first about the Code of Practice review process. It was last reviewed a few years ago, and this current review is looking at the practical operation of the code since then in the context of some of those recent external developments, and particularly the lessons and opportunities for improvement arising from the response to catastrophes like the 2022 floods. The need that's been identified to better support customers experiencing financial hardship and also vulnerable customers, given the evolving community standards and expectations and better practice approaches in those areas, and also the interaction of the code with the law, given the significant regulatory changes that have happened since 2020. It's important to emphasise that the fundamental principle for the review is actually to maintain or enhance consumer protections, not to water them down, and also look at issues like modernisation and efficiency and effectiveness to give good outcomes for consumers. We're consulting widely with a number of stakeholders, and we will continue to do that. We've published our first consultation paper, and we're looking for submissions by the end of May, and I'd encourage all of you to participate in the process. We hope to issue our initial report and recommendations in the middle of the year. Now, the Code of Practice is really the standards that are at the heart of what the general insurance promise is to consumers, and it is evident from what we've learned so far that there are areas where the code could evolve and raise those standards of practice, and we've flagged some of those in the consultation paper. And I think, as Shez highlighted, there's been some stress testing of the code in recent times by, firstly, the COVID pandemic, which had the supply chain and other issues that were highlighted from that, and then also the 2022 floods, when an unprecedented number of individual and small business consumers had to make a claim on their insurance policy. And those events actually tested the code commitments, and in fact highlighted that in many instances it was impossible for insurers to meet the code commitments in those circumstances. And so the consumer experience from those events has highlighted the need for insurers to improve practices in areas like consumer communications, particularly around claims and at the time of claim, around complaints handling, around the treatment of vulnerable customers and those in financial hardship, about their processes for managing third parties, particularly where that's involved in the claims process, and also highlighted the need that actually more resources and different resources need to be able to be allocated and scaled up and down in some of those areas. Now, we, the review panel, recognise that the code cannot and should not be able to provide the solution for all of those areas, but it does have a very important role to play in ensuring that insurance will be there when needed for more Australians. And we're looking particularly carefully at what can be done to strengthen the code so customers are better assisted with their recovery and resilience after an unexpected event happens and they need to call on their insurance. There is a federal parliamentary inquiry into the response to the 2022 floods that's underway, and is also looking at some of those customer experience issues and expected to deliver its report later this year. And so once that report is available, then the review panel will consider it as part of a second consultation and report. But in the meantime, we do want to hear about issues related to floods and other catastrophe events as part of our first consultation, because you can't separate those issues from the other issues that the review is looking at. I want to talk a little bit just about three key focus areas of the review. There are many that I could talk on, but I think these are particularly relevant to some of the sessions that have happened over the last couple of days and even this morning. The first is around customers experiencing financial hardship, where there are commitments in the code around how general insurers will support customers in urgent financial need and when experiencing financial hardship. But this is also an area where stakeholders feel that there is significant scope for change to improve consumer experience and outcomes. For example, the consultation paper notes that ASIC has set out some expectations regarding financial hardship, including that insurers should offer a range of flexible support options to help consumers maintain their cover, such as help in being able to maintain payment of premiums, and also looking at options for the payment of excess at claims time to prevent unfair outcomes. While these expectations were provided in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, their possible broader applicability does warrant consideration, but we need to be mindful of not creating an expectation that insurers will provide regulated personal financial advice. We're also considering whether and how the code should distinguish between the support that's provided to those experiencing short-term financial hardship and those whose hardship is perhaps more entrenched. The banking code has that similar distinction, and it reflects the likely differing needs of those different groups and hence the different insurer responses that might be appropriate. The second area I want to touch on is this issue of customers experiencing vulnerability. And again, there is a definition in the code around what consumer vulnerability means and commits insurers to providing extra care and support to those customers. But this is an area where there is new and emerging better practice approaches that are continuing to evolve. But also I think community standards and expectations about the level and types of support that are provided are changing. And it has been raised by many stakeholders in the context of the review. There is now an international standards organisation publication or standard on customer vulnerability and requirements and guidelines for the design and delivery of inclusive service. And it recognises that vulnerability is a human experience that many people will go through at some point in their lives. And when a person experiences vulnerability, it can create barriers that inhibit their capacity to engage with markets and providers, and that can lead to a further negative impacts like accessibility challenges. So a key focus of the ISO standard is to promote inclusive design as a tool that organisations can use to plan for vulnerability and ensure that their services and products reduce barriers and problems rather than create or exacerbate them. The Deloitte review that was undertaken by the ICA after the 2022 floods also recommended that insurers should review the effectiveness of the definition, identification and support for vulnerable customers during catastrophes. And they noted that after a large-scale event, most customers will be in some way vulnerable. But there's been inconsistency by insurers in identifying customers experiencing heightened levels of vulnerability and who might require additional support. So a broad conception of vulnerability can embrace this notion of situational vulnerability, for example, in a disaster scenario. And a benefit of that approach is that it then doesn't necessarily depend on an individual to self-identify that they're experiencing vulnerability. But there will always be some customers who require prioritised assistance, even where many others are also experiencing some vulnerability after a disaster. And so simply recognising that all people who have experienced traumatic situations could be regarded as vulnerable and need extra help doesn't actually address the challenge of targeting or scaling the insurer's response to address differing customer needs and priorities. The consultation paper also highlights some specific areas of focus in relation to vulnerable customers that we want feedback on and will consider, taking into account recent developments and better practices. And that includes areas like women's financial safety, First Nations people, mental health and wellbeing, and so on. The final area that I want to touch on, and that has been somewhat topical, particularly today, is this issue of insurance affordability and helping reduce risks. And again, I probably don't need to tell this audience that the cost of insurance has risen dramatically, particularly for customers in higher risk areas in recent years. And so, for example, premiums in some classes of business, such as home and motor insurance, have been rising by over 16% per annum in recent periods. That's a lot. There has been some very insightful work done by the Actuaries Institute on home insurance availability and affordability, and the issue of increasing protection gaps that are part of this topic, really, particularly in the light of climate change, is receiving significant focus internationally, including through work being undertaken by the International Association of Insurance Supervisors. Now, insurance premiums are or should be risk signals. Again, I don't need to tell this audience that. So the key way to reduce insurance premiums is to reduce the risk that the premium is covering. And it is often quoted that the return on investment in pre-event risk mitigation is of the order of 10 to 1. And there was some research commissioned by the ICA, by Plenary, that showed that a 5-year program of resilience measures costing approximately $2 billion could reduce costs to governments and households by more than $19 billion by 2050, delivering a return on investment of almost 10 times nationally. Now, codes of practice do not generally directly address prices or premiums. However, given affordability and increasing protection gaps is such a significant community concern, the review panel is considering what, if anything, the code might do in this space, recognising that other mechanisms may be more appropriate. Some of the areas that we've flagged for consideration include concerns that some insurers charge higher amounts where premiums are paid by instalments rather than annually, and also calls for insurance premiums to be payable by centre pay, particularly when you think about we're now in a more digital tech-enabled environment. So what are the different ways in which some of those issues can be addressed? There's concerns been raised about the differential in premiums between new and renewing customers, and the UK has recently introduced rules that require that renewal quotes for home and motor insurance consumers are not more expensive than those for new customers. There's ASIC's report about the range of pricing failures, which were primarily related to internal systems and processes, but they focused on the need to design and promote pricing promises to ensure consumers get the full benefit of any discounts promised. And then there is a question that the panel is considering about how the code might assist through, for example, commitments in relation to ensure a communication to consumers about the material components that comprise their insurance premium and how they have changed, and also options that may be available to the consumer that might offer lower premiums, such as alternative products or policy terms. On risk mitigation, we heard this morning about a number of activities that are happening in that area through the work in northern Queensland to give premium reductions for cyclone retrofitting, and some of the work done by NEMA and the Hazards Insurance Partnership, in particular the Resilient Building app and the like. They're all really good developments, and taken together they could provide a more coordinated scheme that enables risk mitigation measures to be responded to transparently by insurers when communicating and setting premiums, because it is critically important that there is transparency for consumers and other stakeholders about both whether community or individual mitigation measures are being considered by insurers for both new and renewing insurance policies, but also how those measures are being reflected in the proposed premium. And so while some insurers have committed to do this, there is clearly more work that's needed for the consumers and other stakeholders to have both confidence and clarity regarding the impact of their risk mitigation actions on their insurance premiums. And so we are thinking about whether and how the code might be able to address that. In wrapping up, let me just finish with some observations for the profession to consider in tackling some of these challenges. At the heart of meeting the general insurance promise to customers is the effective management of the end-to-end product lifecycle. So that's design, distribution, pricing, underwriting, claims management, and so on. And I would question whether some of the approaches that have been used by the industry in the past and by the actuarial profession over many years are still fit for purpose in a world where the risk profile for both consumers and insurers is rapidly changing, and so are community needs and expectations. So there is a need for more innovation, I think, and different ways of doing things if the insurance industry and its products are to be both sustainable and keep pace with community insurance needs and expectations. And actuaries should be, and indeed many are, making a significant contribution to this much needed innovation. A more customer-centric, data-driven and digitally or an AI-enabled world has significant potential benefits for insurers and consumers, but it's also challenging some of the fundamental concepts of risk pooling that underlie insurance. The more that products are expected to be designed and priced to meet the specific needs and risks of individual consumers, the less tolerance there is for cross-subsidisation across different cohorts of consumers. But that in turn means, and there were some statistics on that this morning, that affordability and availability pressures are unduly focused then on the higher risk, who are often the more vulnerable customers, and contributing to the increasing protection gaps that are rapidly emerging. So how does the general insurance industry and the actuarial profession work with all key stakeholders to develop solutions that strike the right balance between meeting individual customer needs and expectations, maintaining sound and sustainable insurance products and services, and addressing insurance affordability and availability pressures? It needs a broader perspective to be taken by actuaries that moves away from financial soundness and more to promoting better outcomes for consumers. The principle of using data for good that the profession strongly advocates and leveraging the skills and experience that actuaries have to tackle complex problems provide really good foundations, but moving from where we are to where we need to be will likely require significant changes. More innovation in the products that are offered, rethinking how they're fairly and sustainably priced across the full spectrum of consumers that need insurance, and perhaps most importantly, increased transparency about the drivers of risk and how they're being reflected in premiums to incentivise increased investment in risk mitigation. As was said this morning, insurance affordability and availability is a wicked problem with no easy solutions, but it is one that it is imperative that we collectively address if general insurance is to live up to its promise of being there when needed. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Helen and Shez, for your comments, which were very enlightening, and I think everybody will have learnt a lot from. Now, we've got a bit of time for Q&A, and I'd encourage you to use, well, you need to use the app to put in your questions, and we do have a room for some questions. But I think I should congratulate Martin Mulcair on getting in the first question, which is one for you, Shez, which is, what ideas do you have for scaling your claims team to more effectively deal with high-level demand during catastrophes?
Yep. Lots of different things. But it's partly about scaling the claims team, but it's also, as Helen said, getting the components of the value chain, the ecosystem right. So technology clearly will play a massive role in creating scale, consistency, sustainability in our claims team's capacity to respond. Having workforce that we can flex, and we're in a lucky place as an Allianz, as a global organisation. We have access to claims talent across the globe. But really, I think product design, how we simplify what we've got, so that we simplify the claims assessment processes for our claims team, but also the product innovation that we need to bring to market that truly meet the consumer need. And I think in doing that, we will naturally build scalability in our claims teams.
Can I just add, I mean, one of the topics that's come up a lot in the conversations we've had with stakeholders around this is around defining products in a way that doesn't need experts to decide whether the claim is payable or not and things like that. And so there's lots of ways, I think, in which you can improve the product design in a way that actually then makes it much easier come claim time as well, and requires less resources and gets the policyholder paid much more quickly.
Thanks. So we've got a great question here from Jacqueline Reid, which is that newly qualified developing actuaries are often quite focused on data and models. So what advice can each of you offer to those people at that early stage of their career, or for that matter to their leaders and mentors, to make them feel more connected to the promises made to the consumers?
Listen to phone calls. Go with the assessors and shadow them and watch what they do, the conversations they have, the work that they have to assess claims. Sit with the underwriters. Go and spend an enormous amount of time with the front line. and you will get such a deep understanding, and you'll be incredibly inspired by the opportunities that exist. I do it every week. I listen to phone calls. It just energizes. You learn so much and you get so many ideas coming from it. There is no better way to be inspired and learn than to spend time with the people doing it every day.
And I think it's a philosophy and a mindset issue. And again, I think many of us, when we started work way back when, would have thought, well, we're going to work for XYZ company and we're working in this industry. Well, actually, we're working to deliver outcomes for consumers. And if every person in the Australian community was saying, how does my work, what I'm doing, actually support Australians having better lives, better health, better wellbeing, better resilience? If you have that in the back of your mind, then everything you do, even if you're a data tech specialist doing lots of modelling, thinking about how that actually is going to impact the end customer, that's the thing to have front of mind.
Actually, Helen, it's so true, because forever we've said in our industry, in many industries, you know, the actuaries, the finance, the risk people are there to support the front line. Actually, no, we stand side by side together. We are all serving our customers together. And if you shift your thinking from being a support or enabling team, which is a terrible word, to actually being the team, I think you will change the game instantly.
Thank you. That's great insights from both of you. Thank you very much. So here's maybe a tricky question, but let's run with it. It can be tempting for one insurer or for the industry in general to, you know, impose exclusions in cover or underwriting restrictions so that risks can be kept within their risk appetite. But of course, that also leads to another risk, which is maybe the industry or the company, for that matter, becomes less relevant. So can you share any thoughts about innovations that can help insurers and the insurance industry to remain relevant, and in how they protect Australians?
It's always a fine balance between managing the risk, managing the capital, but at the end of the day, if we're not serving our customer and meeting their needs, in the long term, none of anything else really matters. So it is a fine balance, but this is where I think product innovation, this is the time for product innovation. If there are risks that we really absolutely can't cover, are there other ways that we can provide some level of support? So parametric insurance and microinsurance, there are other solutions we can bring to the table that give the most vulnerable sections of our community some level of cover to protect them, even if you can't protect the full extent of the issue.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to something that was said in this morning's session about really understanding the problem that we're trying to solve here. And it's actually not just one problem, there's lots of problems. And so I think it's about the industry and the insurers working with other stakeholders to be clearer about where the boundaries of sustainable insurance are and what the products are that might support that, and then where there is a need for a different solution because the customers aren't able to afford insurance at all. But from a community and looking after Australians' perspective, the insurers perhaps can work with other stakeholders like the government to find solutions to those problems. Yep.
Fantastic, thank you. So do you think we should be sort of almost rethinking the whole premise of home insurance, just focusing on home insurance for a moment, and more kind of making it a bundle of services, if you want to put it that way, you know, that might require coordination with an array of providers in a more hands-on way perhaps than is currently the case, you know, so working with the customers more actively to reduce and manage their risk, whether that's, you know, helping them manage the physical characteristics of their properties and so on?
Look, I think yes and no is my answer, because I think it's more about thinking about, you know, what are the types of claims, and if we focus on, say, floods, what do the customers need to be able to recover from that flood? And some of it may be the help from the insurers with clean-up costs or, you know, rebuilding or whatever, but some of it is not within the remit of the insurers. And so again, I think it is about thinking about what can be and should be covered and provided by insurance, and actually then how does the insurer work with others to make sure that that overall recovery and resilience package is met. The one area where, I think we've heard some feedback through the code review is what is the role of the insurer in coordinating the third parties that are involved in helping a customer recover from a claim? So if there is a house to be rebuilt, you don't necessarily just leave it to the customer to manage all the trades and make sure they've got all the bits happening in the right space. Actually, is there a role for the insurer? And so thinking about what product that looks like and how you design recovery support and the more longer term sort of claim solution, etc. I think there is a role for the insurer. So it is thinking a bit differently about the product, but it's not the only solution.
I agree. I think yes and no. I come back to, I have this kind of firm view that if we are adding complexity to how the product works to make it fit, then we're probably heading down the wrong path and we need to look for alternate solutions. So keeping things simple is really important for the consumer, for the insurer, and finding lots of different ways for insurers and government to come together is what's at play here.
Thank you. So here's a left field thought. So, expect the unexpected. Last session of the conference, last Q&A of the conference. So Bryce Woodward makes the perfectly reasonable point that when we have a major catastrophe, capacity for the industry as a whole to service claims is very dependent on the pool of available trades, which is, a very obvious point perhaps, but one that, is painfully experienced after many catastrophes. So his question is, does that mean insurers should think about supporting trade apprenticeships to help improve capacity in the future? I don't think anybody's asking you to write a cheque now, Shez, but if either of you have an immediate reaction to that, quite innovative idea, I think that'd be interesting.
There is a role for us to play in the community to develop the right talent in the right areas, and these may well be things that we look at.
Yeah, I don't think I would see the insurance industry as sort of supporting the apprenticeships of the building industry, but I think it is important that across this, the different sectors that are involved in recovery, that there is some way to scale resources as and when needed. And but there's also, I think, then a communication challenge back to the insurers around if there are delays because you can't get the supplies and the trades, etc., how is that being communicated to the consumers so that they're not necessarily blaming an insurer for something that is beyond the insurer's control? And again, a lot of the issues that are coming up in the code review are around a need to improve the ways insurers communicate with consumers and other stakeholders about what's happening and why, or what's not happening and why.
So here's a question from the audience for you, Helen, specifically, though Shez, I'm sure if you want to weigh in, you'd be most welcome as well. But to you, Helen, specifically, you mentioned, the concept of striking the balance between the concepts of tailoring on the one hand and the concepts of pooling or the pool on the other hand. So I'm sure you've thought a bit about what principles sort of govern striking that balance. Can you elaborate on that?
Look, I've given it a bit of thought, but it's actually a really hard problem, I think, because if you talk to, someone who lives in an area that isn't prone to bushfires and floods, they don't want to pay or cross-subsidise those who don't. But at the end of the day, I think, and maybe this is an area where the actuarial profession and the Institute can do a bit more, is actually conveying that message that insurance is about pooling risk and it inherently involves a degree of cross-subsidisation. But what I think is important is setting some criteria and principles where you say, well, actually, it is not fair for these consumers to be subsidising those consumers. And that might mean that actually those most vulnerable or high-risk customers need some other mechanism or some supports beyond insurance. And so I think that it is possible to develop a framework that says, well, 90% of consumers can get affordable insurance and we should have products that design that and involve the appropriate risk pooling. But there is a group hopefully a relatively small group, that where that's not possible. And then it's about thinking about, well, what is the solution to make sure that those people have a similar level of resilience and support to those who can kind of look after themselves. So it's, you know, it's a very high level concept. It's not a detailed kind of here's what it looks like, but I think that's the way my mind is thinking about it.
Thank you.
It's a problem for this audience to solve. Wouldn't it be amazing?
Absolutely. So we're getting fairly close to the end, so I might just ask each of you if you've sort of got one takeaway thought for all of us, you know, on these issues, if I may. So perhaps Shez, if you're happy to go first.
I talked earlier, you know, technology, streamlining processes, systems, building scale in our operations is a critical part. Collaboration is a critical part. But I think for this audience in particular, how we reimagine the insurance proposition so it becomes really, truly relevant and meaningful for the community, how we can really simplify things and build trust because the proposition is much more relevant and has evolved is a big part for us all to collaborate on. And what an amazing challenge that is, and what an amazing thing if we were able to solve that together.
Fantastic.
And for me, I think it's about transparency, and I think we need to demystify some of the black boxes and the information that's given to consumers and actually help them understand what the risk that they're exposed to is, how that's being priced, what their policy covers, what it doesn't, so that they can make better decisions about their insurance and the protection they need and how they, you know, how they recover better after events because it's much more transparent to them what's driving their premiums and what they can do about it.
Thank you. So I think I would say if we had another hour for Q&A, we wouldn't run out of questions. So unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. So it's just been fantastic having both of you here, Helen and Shez, to share your thoughts and your insights with us. So just before we go to the very important closing session, which will include some breaking news, can I just get all of us to thank Shez and Helen very much.
You want us to go?
Thank you. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, this is the time when we close the summit. There is some new news that most people don't know involving the recipient of an important grant. But before that, I'd just like to give you a little snapshot of the summit as I and other observers saw it. I think it's been a fantastic time, and I'm very confident that we will leave here better equipped to think better and live better to think bigger and live better after hearing from all the inspiring actuaries and guest presenters this week. So could we just put our hands together for all the people who presented this week, because we really appreciate it. So I'm just going to call out a handful of highlights, starting with Anne Sherry, the first session on Wednesday, and she wants us to be brave, us actuaries to be brave and to step forward and meet some of Australia's biggest challenges. And I think and hope that resonated with all of us. And her personal sort of mantras made a big impact on me. Be optimistic, have a sense of humour, take an interest in the world around you, and importantly, keep connected to your friends, your colleagues, and perhaps most importantly, your family. So that was great. We then had a session in which our speakers talked about how the life insurance industry is going through a period of transition. And it was great to hear from Suzanne Smith from APRA and her co-presenters about the opportunities presented during these times of change. The second plenary of the summit on Wednesday afternoon reminded us of the important role our profession, the actuarial profession, has in helping Australian consumers during some of life's most difficult moments. And of course, we heard moving personal stories that really brought home the impact of the work we do in the industries that we serve. And the next morning, Sophie Scott urged us all to look after our own well-being and to place limits and boundaries and to recognise what your body and mind needs in order to achieve peak performance. Another highlight was the plenary later that day, chaired by this year's Summit Organising Committee Chair, Douglas Isles. It was fantastic to hear from all the presenters about all the great things they're doing and about actuaries creating innovative solutions for some of Australia's most vulnerable people. Then we moved on to the session on digitisation and the consumer. And of course, Elaine's enthusiasm just serves to emphasise how Australians have used their analytical skills in non-traditional ways. So, for example, we heard about the complexities of managing an airline loyalty program, and that reminds us of how in demand and on point our skills are beyond our traditional areas, how good we can be at helping people solve a very broad range of business and society issues. And it's good to also remember even Javona from Grab and their focus on providing a pared down solution for consumers with limited financial literacy and capacity. So we also heard from John Green in the session about risks, and he and his colleagues on stage provided a great overview of a whole lot of risk-related matters. I think it's the Carrington effect and all that sort of stuff. Absolutely fascinating. And they reminded us to value our judgment as actuaries and to recognise that risks might also be, or maybe opportunities, and also that even machines can make mistakes. And I'll throw in a personal thought there, which was I was also interested to get John's insight into writing a novel, but that's a separate topic. So today we had two plenaries, and they really brought home the role of the insurance industry in particular, but of us as crucial players with that industry in helping people when things go wrong. Insurance plays a vital role in our community, and we play a vital role in helping that industry to design sustainable products. Also, so many highlights from the concurrent sessions, and I really urge you to revisit the program and continue your professional development from that deep pool of expertise that we have had access to as part of this conference. Actuaries have shared, and others have shared their technical skills and also had important discussions to advance the profession and society. So I now want to move on to some other matters in closing. So first of all, I'd like to call out the Brent Walker Grant, which is named after a very distinguished actuary, Brent Walker, who sadly passed away last year. Brent was an early advocate for the roles of actuaries in health and began our Health Practice Committee. And he kindly donated his winnings from the AICA Max Lander Award in order to fund a female actuary to attend this summit. And I'd really like to congratulate this year's recipient of that grant, Nirasana Krishna. So Nirasana, congratulations. I think I speak for many in saying I'm delighted that you won that award. So I'd also, just before we come to a close, like to thank those who've made this 2024 summit a success. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to our 2024 partners and to acknowledge our major partner, EY. Secondly, a big congratulations to our 2024 Summit Organising Committee. It's just been a fantastically impressive program that you have curated. So could you please join with me in thanking our Organising Committee? And also, could I please encourage you strongly to complete the feedback survey? It's now available in the app. So my suggestion is to do it straight away before you forget. And this is really crucial for us in planning our 2025 summit and indeed other future events. And of course, I'd like to again thank all the speakers and chairs over the past 3 days. We very much appreciate your time and your considerable contribution. And one last thing, which the head office team did not put in my notes, is I would like to thank the head office team for their considerable efforts in putting this conference together and running it. We really appreciate it. So, and with that, I now call the 2024 All Actuaries Summit to a close.